Great. All right, Kazemde George. Congrats on the new record, I Insist, on Greenleaf Music.
Thank you.
When did it come out? October?
October 21st.
Yep. And it's your debut album, all original music.
That's right.
Yep.
10 songs.
Amazing. What's the band?
The band is my wife, Sami Stevens, on vocals.
We're going to have her come in.
She'll be here in a minute. Me on saxophone. Piano player is somebody who we both went to school with at NEC, Isaac Wilson. And on bass, it's Tyrone Allen from DC. Tyrone Allen II, I should say. And Adam Aruda on drums from, I want to say Toronto. Is he from Toronto? He's from Canada.
Sure, Canada. All right. Great. Now, I want to do a little Kazemde retrospective before we get started for all of the uninitiated who aren't familiar with your upbringing and your background as a musician.
Sure.
So you start off in California. What got you into music in the first place, and what brought you to saxophone?
Well, my dad is a huge music fan, and so growing up, music was always like really important. Always music playing in our house. Always really good music. Like I grew up listening to like Keith Jarrett, Bob Marley, Paul Simon, a lot of reggae and dub music, Burning Spear, stuff like that. Herbie Hancock, just Ornette Coleman. We listen to a lot of good music in the house. So then, I also, my parents had me start on piano lessons when I was really young too. When I was like 6 or 7, started playing piano. And around when we moved to California, when I was like 9 or 10, they were basically like, why don't you pick another instrument? Because I think piano was never really like my favorite thing. I didn't really like practice that much. But they took me to a guy's house who like had all the different like woodwinds, and they were like, which one do you want to play? And I picked saxophone. So then I started playing saxophone ever since then and got pretty into it.
Sure, yeah. Was there anything in particular, or was just that happened to be the instrument that you chose, and then you've stuck with it since then?
Well, I don't know. I think my parents took me to somebody who played woodwinds. So he didn't have like trumpet or anything, but it was basically between like flute, saxophone, and clarinet, basically. And I was like, saxophone.
Stands to reason.
But I remember the first day I got my saxophone, I was so into the idea of like improvising. Like I just like grabbed the horn and just like started playing, even though I didn't know any of the notes, and it probably like sounded god awful. You know what I mean? But just that idea of like, oh, like this is something where you just like you kind of just do it. Like I always loved that, and I thought like practicing piano was so boring because it was like I was always practicing in the context of like, here's a piece that is written on paper, and like your job is to play this perfectly, and like every note that you play wrong is like a punishment. Like, you know what I mean?
Sure.
So yeah, I think that difference when I was 9 years old was really cool to me.
Yeah, so the saxophone just gives you the opportunity, you can improvise, or you came at it from a different perspective. It seemed like a less
Well, it's funny because the instrument has nothing to do with that, right?
No,
it's just a mindset, but something about the instrument told me like, this is an instrument where like there's more freedom.
Yeah, I think there's something to be said for that. It's not always clear why, but I think that makes a lot of sense. So what was your, did you have like a like jazz band in school, or what was it that you when you were coming up, like how did you learn to get into improvisation and
Yeah, so I went to East Bay School of the Arts for middle school, which is like a private arts middle school. It's not around anymore. It kind of fell apart actually while I was there. But I was there for 2 years, and Jim Munzenreiter was the band leader. I remember him. He was pretty hilarious. He had us playing some dope music in like 6th and 7th grade. I remember we did like a recording session where we like went to a recording studio and recorded the songs we were working on. We recorded Triste and In a Mellow Tone. I remember those 2 songs. Oh, and Pick Up the Pieces. Dope songs that I still think are really good songs to this day. So that was cool. In high school, I didn't have any jazz or music at my school at all. It was like a really small public alternative high school that I went to. And yeah, they didn't really have extracurriculars. So instead, I did this program called Oaktown Jazz Workshops, which was led by this trumpet player, Khalil Shahid, who passed away a couple of years ago. Or a while ago, maybe more like 8 years ago. But he ran a really cool program where I feel like I like basically learned like the oral tradition of jazz from him and the other instructors. It was like twice a week they would basically run an ensemble where kids would come play, but there would always be like professional musicians playing with us. So Khalil would play trumpet, there would be like a professional bass player, this guy Ravi, there'd be a piano player. Robbie runs the program now, by the way, and he's great. There'd be like a piano player and a drummer there, and so the kids would play, but like if for some reason there wasn't a kid drummer, then it would just be like a professional jazz drummer that you get to play with at the session. So we learned a lot, and then they would take us out and do gigs with us too. So we learned a lot of just like how to do a gig, how to learn music, and it was really they really deprioritized reading in that for what it's worth. So later I felt like my reading was really poor, like when I was in college, and I had to really catch up. But I feel like I learned a lot of other skills in terms of like using your ear and how to like communicate with musicians off the page and a lot of stuff like that that I really value today.
Sure.
So,
yeah. And you talk about
cool.
the oral tradition. I think that's something that is often lost in, let's say, contemporary jazz education, where it becomes a lot about theory and a lot about technique, but the idea of like learning music from recordings and learning, like passing music down from, you know, teacher to student or from musician to musician is sometimes put on the back burner because it's a little bit, I don't know if it's harder to teach that. I don't know what it is, if it's like, it doesn't follow the sort of classical methodology that people learn or something like that. But what was like, how did they do that? How did they convey that? You know, was it a matter of just learning the music by ear? Or
they would make us learn songs by ear. That's one big thing. They would that was kind of the biggest thing, but I also feel like they just drilled into us a lot of like specific just practices. Like there'd be a big group of us, you know what I mean? There'd be like 8 horn players. And I remember like these days when it would be like, okay, everybody would take a solo on like Blue Monk or something, you know? And I remember it would be like somebody would take their solo and then they would like, we all sucked, like, right? We were like 9th graders. Like you get lost on the form and then you like end your solo totally in the wrong place. And I remember them just like, and then the next person would come in somewhere in the middle of the form. And I just remember them really being like, no. Like, you guys have to know where you are in the form and you have to signal to the band that you're ending your solo so that, and then the next person has to come in right away. So if somebody ended their solo and then the rest of the 7 of us were like, whose solo is it? They would like get on us for that and be like, somebody has to come in. Like, you guys are a group. You have to figure this out. And they would drill us on that type of shit.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I just feel like that was really valuable. I think sometimes people, when they're in their jazz programs, it's really just about like, read this chart, like and execute this stuff, like play this chord scale. We were learning a lot of other specific stuff that I just like really value today.
Yeah, stuff that holds through to being a professional musician that applies to like,
yeah,
or as an artist or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, and there's just like a lot of learning from experience too. Like another specific thing I remember is like being on a gig with Khalil, and like we would end a song, and he would be like almost immediately counting off the next song, and we didn't have a set list, but like clearly when we were playing the previous song, he was thinking about what the next song would be, and he was picking a song that he just knew everybody knew.
Right.
So he could just call it, count it off right away. You know, and it's like, man, that's a pet peeve I have with a lot of jazz musicians who are fully grown, like professional musicians, bro. They be up on the stage and the song ends and they're just like talking and shit. And it's like the audience feels this really uncomfortable feeling of being like,
yeah.
So are you guys gonna play or what? You know what I mean? Like, so I'm really grateful that I learned a lot of these kinds of things. There's more. I mean, I don't know. I'm sure these are just specific lessons that I really specifically remember, but I feel like there's a lot of subtle things that they were teaching us.
Sure. Well, you're going to get a lot out of it too if you have the opportunity to play with professionals. If you have the opportunity to hang out and play with people who actually want to play.
That's what it comes down to, is that concept of like mentorship.
For sure.
As opposed to the like classical like Western academic system of like teacher with a bunch of students, like as opposed to like a mentor who's like taking you under their wing and you're learning from that person, not because they're like telling you what to do, but you're just learning from their example. You know, you follow what they do.
Sure, right.
And they just tell you if you fuck up or something.
Right. Yeah, right. Yeah. So you graduate from high school, and then you go to do the Harvard NEC joint program.
Right.
Which is, the way they do that is, you're playing music the whole time, but you get an undergrad, you get like a bachelor's degree from Harvard and then a master's from NEC, right?
Yep. You do your lessons at NEC, and I did some ensembles at NEC, and at the end of that, you got your master's in music and your undergrad from Harvard.
What'd you do at Harvard?
I studied neurobiology, which is
What is that?
fascinating to me to this day. Neurobiology is the study of the biology of the nervous system, which primarily includes your brain, but also just your whole external nervous system that runs through your whole body. It's the biology, like looking basically at a cellular, chemical and cellular level, how does your brain function and how does it do all of the different tasks that it carries out. But from a cellular level, because there's chemists, there's brain chemistry that people study, and then there's a lot of what you call like neuroscience, which tends to be more on a more macro level. It's looking more at like data and envisioning the brain as a system and then sort of trying to run computation on that system. Whereas neurobiology really focuses on like, okay, we've got a population of cells that are interacting and carrying out different processes that eventually create your brain, your brain functions. So how do they do that? What's this cell doing? How does this cell communicate with that cell? That's kind of what it is.
Yeah. Do you feel like, other than sort of a avocational interest, that study you carry any of those lessons with you into the world of music?
That's a good question that I ask myself sometimes. I mean, in a really concrete way, no. I'm not like running neurobiology calculations, on the day-to-day to like help me make music or anything like that. But I think there's some deep truth that I understand about the brain that we as humans have learned from neurobiology, and by having studied that like in depth, I feel like I understand it on a level that helps me understand certain things. Just like, I don't know, one thing that's popping to my mind is like, I think all musicians interact with the concept of like muscle memory and how to develop muscle memory. It's like crucial to practice, right? So I feel like I don't know what it's really worth, but on some level, I think I understand that process of how you form muscle memory a little more specifically than your average musician, just because I've studied those kinds of things. And don't ask me to explain that right now, because I'll fall on my face. But
that's all right. I think the average, probably people listening to this would fall off at a certain point.
But I mean, that's the most I could say is that there's certain things about how we learn that I've studied in depth that I think I have some interesting insight on just through the lens of neurobiology. But am I applying that constantly all the time? I don't know if it completely shapes my whole worldview or anything.
Yeah, but it's an interesting background. And then while you were at Harvard as well, you went to Cuba.
Yes.
For what, a semester?
For 2 semesters, for 10 months, for like almost a year basically.
How did you pitch that? Did you have to pitch something? Was it
Yes, absolutely. I applied for a grant.
So you got a grant and you said to them, I'm going to Cuba for...
Yeah, well, the grant is a very specific, interesting grant that Harvard offers. It's for graduating seniors, so it's supposed to be for like after your last year at Harvard. And it's basically a travel grant that is made, it's called the Gardner Fellowship, and it was made to encourage students. Basically, the context is the person making the grant is aware that Harvard students are extremely career and academically focused, and it was meant to push them outside of their career and their academic interests and force them to basically sort of like find themselves in another country, not thinking about academics and not thinking about their careers. So that was like the specific requirements of the grant was like, give us a proposal that is not academic and not career-based.
Wow.
For you to go to another country, carry out a project or some sort of learning or something. So my proposal was to go to Cuba and study Afro-Cuban percussion. It was awesome.
So what did you learn? What did you take away from your time in Cuba, besides being able to speak Spanish?
Man, it's a long conversation, man. I took away a lot from Cuba. I learned Spanish. I learned Cuban Spanish, which is very specific. I learned how to play rumba music, which is a style of kind of like popular sort of street drumming that people play in Cuba that is really amazing, that I really love and I continue to practice and play today.
You got a band. What's the name of the band?
Kikiriki BK. Yeah, I have a
you might have to say that
band.
a little slower, man.
It's Kikiriki BK.
Right on.
BK stands for Brooklyn.
Okay.
BK.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's a rumba band that I still play. I'm like the lead singer in a band that is all in Spanish. It's kind of hilarious.
Sure. You keep it up though.
Yeah, so learning that, and it was really fascinating to like experience living in a communist dictatorship.
Sure.
That,
yeah, I believe it.
That is such a different experience than anything I had ever seen just in America or any of the other countries I've been to. So that was cool. I feel like I got a really unique experience too, because I really feel like I was able to be a sort of a real fly on the wall because I look Cuban, and after a few months, my accent, like I got really good at faking being Cuban. People would think I was Cuban all the time in all sorts of situations, and so I feel like a lot of foreigners going there, when everybody's really aware that you're not from there, they sort of treat you different. It's sort of inevitable. But I feel like there was a lot of moments when I got to not get that different treatment. People were treating me like some other random dude from Cuba. And that was cool. I feel like I learned a lot from that, just about like Cuban culture that most tourists or visitors wouldn't get to get, you know?
Sure, no doubt. I think we can cover this later on, talking about the record in particular, but do you feel, I mean, you must feel like the music that you learned there, learning percussion and being around that scene, and that has to have had a substantial influence on your music.
Definitely.
But it sounds to me like your writing and playing is sort of an organic inclusion of that music. It isn't like you're not playing specifically Afro-Cuban music or writing music that is like overtly Afro-Cuban, but there are components of that seep into your music.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and when I think about like fusion music, so-called fusion music or whatever, sometimes I feel like, and I'm definitely not naming any names or anything, but sometimes we get a little like, some people get a little, in my opinion, a little off with how it should really be done. And I think that people, sometimes they set out to combine two types of music, and they go, I'm gonna take jazz and I'm gonna combine it with Afro-Cuban music, so let me like put my brain to this. And there's definitely something to be said for that. I don't wanna say that's all bad, but I, in my own music, prefer to do it a little differently, which is that like, if I want to combine jazz and Cuban music, well, I should study jazz and internalize jazz and make jazz part of who I am, and study Afro-Cuban music and internalize that and make that part of who I am. And then I should just make music. And that's the fusion. It's in me, you know. The other way feels a little surface level sometimes. If you're not going to the lengths to really internalize that stuff, and you're just like going through sort of like a practice of being like, I'm going to combine these things. I thought about it. This is the combination that I've created. Sometimes I'm not as convinced by that kind of music.
Sure.
So that's my goal, is to just like internalize the shit out of that stuff and then just play. Exactly like how you said. I think you summed it up for me pretty well.
Cool. So I think we're getting pretty close. We'll bring Sami in here in a second here, but before we do that, so you got a bunch of original tunes on the new album, and you're writing all the time. What is your writing process then?
Writing process. I write on piano.
Okay.
I love the piano. It's such a great instrument. Or these days I usually write on my Nord keyboard.
Sure.
But I feel really inspired by the musicians who I get to play with, like the rhythm sections that I play with, and going out to play gigs. So usually I'm writing stuff that, with those guys in mind, I'm like, oh, I want to play this with these cats. And yeah, I get on the piano and I'm working out. Usually, a lot of times these days, it's starting from harmonic ideas.
Okay.
Over the last 10 years or so, I've really been studying Brazilian music, and I'm really inspired by the way they use voice leading in Brazilian music. Feels very strong. Feels like it's taking all of the history of Western classical music and really condensing it into something that is really beautiful and cohesive. But then combining Brazilian music, just to sidetrack, but like Brazilian music then is also combining so much African rhythm and like concepts of that like to me just makes it such a beautiful type of music. But through me just studying that harmony, I feel like a lot of times I'm trying to embody that kind of approach to harmony, but then using different rhythmic approaches than Brazilian music and like different song structures and stuff. Yeah, so I usually end up sort of thinking of harmony, and then a lot of times I have the harmony and I like to sing the melody that I'm hearing. So the music, I think that in that way, my melodies are very like intuitive. And I see a lot of my peers, I think, write melodies that are less intuitive. They write melodies that are like a little cerebral sometimes.
Sure.
And I think that's really cool, but I just like usually don't do that.
Yeah.
But my melody is like the melody that just like I want to sing over the thing. It's
Yeah.
usually
But
what
you're
it is.
starting with, let's say, a harmonic foundation. You'll go through and
Yes.
say like this, ooh, I like where this is going, I like this chord progression. Now let me sing what I'm hearing melodically over it, rather than starting from like, oh, there's a melody I can use. Let me see if I can harmonize this.
Definitely, yeah. At least for this album. And
Sure.
I mean, I'm getting to the point where it's become like a specific process that I'm like almost like I need to switch it up and start with the melody or
Sure,
something,
right.
you know? But it's been working. I like the music on this album, so maybe I'll keep writing some songs like this.
Yeah, sure. It's interesting. I feel like everybody I talk to has a different approach to writing. And, you know, I think there's probably as many different approaches to writing as there are people who are writing.
Yeah, isn't it cool? I love that about
It's
it.
amazing. Yeah, and it's fun to get to talk to people about their different.
Another thing, though, I should add is like this music is music that I didn't write this in like a year. The most recent songs on the album are probably from 2018.
Okay.
And the oldest songs are from like 2013 that I wrote when I was still in school. So my process has changed over that time.
Sure.
Some of those old songs I wrote a little differently. Like, for example, Things Line Up, I did not start from the harmony. Definitely didn't. That was just like melody, counter melody kind of thing that I wrote on piano still, but I specifically wasn't really thinking about the harmony when I wrote it. It was more just like a melody with a counter melody. And that kind of created its own harmony. And then from there, I was like, okay, what chords are these?
Sure. Yeah. Interesting. Okay. So, and that tune is the melody or the counter melody. I don't know which one comes first or whatever what you want to say. One of them on the record is saxophone. One of them is voice.
Right.
Okay. Cool.
No,
All right.
actually, no. The sax and voice are sort of harmonizing the melody there, but the counter melody is the bass line. The melody and the counter melody was basically melody and bass.
Gotcha.
Maybe
Okay.
is a better way to say it.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah. Okay.
But then that melody splits off into harmony sometimes, and so that's when the voice and the saxophone split off into two parts.
For sure. Okay. Well, let's bring Sami in here if she wants to come in, because I think this is her.
Sammy, join
this
us.
is her moment.
We'll have to cough that
appearing in the woodworks. Oh, thanks. You've been very restrained. Okay, this is
Sammy's my wife, by the way. I
this
don't know
is
if I
Sami
mentioned
Stevens, now Kaz's wife. They have been married in a beautiful ceremony not that long ago.
Or you were.
Yep, it was wonderful. It was a wonderful time. So, one of the things I really like about this album, I love this album. I think you did a great job.
Thanks, man.
It's really good. All right, everybody listening should check it out because it's really good. And there's a lot of music. I'm just going to tell you my experience with it for a second, all right? And then we'll get into the specifics of it. So that, first of all, people will listen to it, and then so they can pause this and listen to the whole album, and then come back and check out the rest of it. Okay, but there's a lot of music that comes out now in the sort of greater jazz umbrella that seems to me very, like you listen to it and you're like, cool, that's correct. You did the homework. It came out, there's harmonies and everybody played respectable solos and what have you. But maybe maybe this is just a personal opinion of mine and maybe I'm just difficult. I don't know. Is that there isn't as much, let's say, the emotion is lost a little bit to maybe sort of technical perfection or something like that. And I feel like first of all, I think that you've really captured something organic. It does feel like it's uniquely your own without having to try to be anything in particular. And there's also the energy that I like in, like, the thing that drew me to jazz in the first place, the energy of it and the spontaneity and the communication. But more than that, like, the spirit of it. I don't even know if I have language to describe it, I think is there. I think you really captured, like, a certain energy that is not, it's not like, you're not recreating, like, 1960s hard bop music or any kind of thing like that. And you're not like, oh, this is some radical new thing, but it's uniquely your own and it encapsulates like all of this music throughout time. But I feel like it really, you've really captured an energy in this thing. So thanks for doing that. You did it, in my opinion, you know?
Yeah.
One of the things you do that's really interesting is the voice is used throughout in different ways, but it's all cohesive. But sometimes you're singing songs and other times it's saxophone and voice become the two, let's say, horns. What you would think of as being horns in a jazz band or whatever.
Right.
Is there a way that you've gone about, like, is the idea behind that, like, okay, we're going to have a second voice here, this will be perfect for voice? Were you thinking about it like timbrally, like voice and saxophone, or like where did that approach come about?
You can answer that.
Well, I mean, there's something about this album that is very practical, and maybe that goes to what you were saying about us capturing a thing, because this is music that like we play at gigs, and that is a real thing that exists out in the world. You could come through and check it out. I'm playing one tonight after this. And that space of like playing specifically at these jam sessions that I usually host that you've been to.
I've been there.
That space has an energy. And if anything, maybe on the record, that's what we captured.
I like that there may be a lot there. Yeah, I think there's a lot there.
Yeah, and that's intentional. One of my big gripes with jazz these days, and I think it's the same gripe that a lot of people have, but this is my way of putting it, is that jazz lacks social like relevancy these days. Like there's no place where people go to interact with jazz. I mean, there are places, but they're not big enough, and they're not well understood. And jazz kind of, the places that people do go to understand jazz, a lot of times they're bullshit. They suck. And...
Well, in what respect? Let's see if we can solve these problems. We're going to solve these problems with this episode.
I want to get back to your original question about why Sammy's on this. But yeah, I mean, we can solve these problems. I don't know. I mean, like...
But what is it about like certain jazz venues where you're like, this isn't working?
Well, jazz is like fancy for people. Like what I'm referring to maybe is like the general associations that people have with jazz are like all wrong, and they're not real. And what I'm trying to get at is that I feel like when we do this jam session, like that's a real vibe that people can come hang out at, and like musicians who come to jam, they're there for like a real reason, and we're socializing and we're interacting with the greater community there. And I feel like the way that the community is generally interacting with jazz is all fake, and it's basically just capitalism, and it's just marketing.
It's almost like
bullshit marketing.
Like the same way you would interact with art at like a very fancy museum or something like that. Like it's kind of just like very codified in black and white, and you maybe spend a lot of money to be there. Or, you know what I mean? It's just very like, oh, this is, and now we clap. You know, it's kind of just like...
Exactly. And I think I could make a similar critique of the art world for the same exact reason. Where it's not something that people in the community know how to genuinely interact with. Like, when I think of a great jazz audience, they're listening to the music and they're interacting with the music in a certain kind of way that I feel like people in general don't know how to do. And at this session, they do, is what I'm getting at. Like, I feel like I'm creating that space that I want to, where I feel like jazz is really alive, and like this music, improvised music that we're playing, is really alive. Just to get back to my original point of why I even brought up this whole like conundrum, is just that Sammy's my wife, and so like she would come to these gigs and she'd be there, and it would be like. Also, and on top of that, Sami is an incredibly versatile singer who can sing. Like you mentioned, she's doing different things on the album. She can sing a swing song really, really well. And she can sing a song like Happy Birthday, which is like an R&B song, really, really well. And she can sing a song like Things Line Up, where the melodies are incredibly like jumpy and complex and hard to sing on tune. She can do all of that flawlessly. So... when she's there at the gig, and it's like, okay, I have this music that I'm developing, and you're also there when I'm writing all the music. It just makes sense to bring her in any moment where it's like, oh, I could add another little part here. You could sing this part. Or this is a song, and I want you to like sing the melody. Help me write lyrics, Sami. You know what I mean? Like all that. So it's just, I feel like I was trying to create a space for jazz, and Sami was in that space. So that's why she's there, on the record, doing all that stuff.
That's why you gotta show up.
That's fair.
That is why you gotta show up. That's a real thing.
Yep. Okay, I want to get back to the jam session. But two of the tunes, Skylight and Happy Birthday, how do those come about?
So Sami wrote the lyrics to those ones.
Yeah.
And I wrote like the music. You wrote the melody to Happy Birthday too, correct? Or did I? No, I think I wrote the melody to it. I don't remember.
I'm gonna have you get close to that mic just so that we.
Okay, I'll move it.
But yeah, basically those songs were little collaborations where I had a song written and Sami helped me out and we turned it into like a real, I don't know, I'm using the concept of a song as being like a song with
Like
lyrics.
a songy song. Like a song with lyrics.
And I think it worked really well. I mean, the fact that Sami knows me so well and that she's heard the songs from their conception, from when I was still just working out the harmony or whatever, she's a great person to write lyrics for me.
I think also...
You're a great poet, you know?
Thank you. I think we kind of just have like a similar perspective. Maybe not a similar background, but like what we care about in music is pretty aligned. Our priorities. So I think it works. We've been making music together since before we were dating.
Yeah, this ain't our first rodeo.
So, yeah. It's like, yeah.
How long is that? Since the NEC days? Because Sami, you
probably.
also went to
I think,
NEC
like,
for the public.
7, 8 years, maybe.
I think more. I think maybe almost a decade.
There you
That's
go.
something else,
I went to NEC, yeah. Yeah.
And many more.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
So if you go into writing lyrics for one of these pieces, what? Let's take examples. Let's do examples. So
Yeah.
pick one. Pick your favorite one. Skylight.
Let's talk
or
about
Happy
Skylight
Birthday.
because that's kind of a funny story.
Okay.
So Kaz wrote the song, the melody, and the harmony and everything. And then there was some kind of conversation, I don't remember exactly, of like, do you want me to write lyrics for this? I feel like this would work with lyrics, or you asked me to write lyrics, something like that. And so, I'm just trying to get a sense of like, so what do you imagine this song to be about? Like, what do you imagine the mood of this song to be? Which is always a funny conversation with Kaz because I feel like usually the answer is like, well, this is a song that it's music. It's like, I feel like you don't tend to think in like metaphors
I have a
much.
hard time ascribing like metaphors
Right.
to music. Sometimes it feels weird. I don't get it.
Yeah, it feels like a force for you. So I was kind of, but you had already titled it. And what was the origin of the title? I don't
remember.
I think
why
it might have
called
just been
Skylight.
kind of like one of those like I love lamp kind of things, So he was like Skylight, So I was like, okay, so you want me to like write a song about a skylight? And you were like, sure. And so I just wrote it about a skylight.
Interesting, but it creates. In that case, then you have to be creative about. You have to say like, what can I do with it? Here's the idea.
Exactly.
How do I work around this and try to create a story behind this?
Exactly, and I wouldn't have done that if I felt like I was really just if it sucked. You know what I mean? I just liked that as a prompt. I happen to like just enjoy that kind of challenge to be like, okay, we're writing a song about a skylight because I feel like a skylight actually is just like ripe with symbolism and metaphor and like I think a skylight is, any kind of window. I think it could be a million different things, metaphorically, like poetically speaking, but a skylight is sort of it's a special kind of window. So that was like that just worked out for me.
You made a really great video for that too.
Thank you.
Sami also made the video for that song.
Right on. Where can people find that?
It's on YouTube. I think it's on the Greenleaf Music YouTube channel.
That's
Cool.
right.
Great. All right. Well, everybody should check that out.
Along with a couple of other videos of ours and all their other videos, which are great.
Yeah, it's a beautiful song. I think very often, I often say that limitations breed creativity. Because
Right.
oftentimes, if you have infinite things to deal with, sometimes it's like, where do I even start with this? But to start with a prompt like, what is this? It's going to be a skylight. Where can you go with that? And the idea of the metaphors and various things like that.
Yeah. I'm also just generally really interested in like surrealism. Like I like writing lyrics that are kind of like surrealist. So it worked that way.
What about Happy Birthday? That seems like a very different vibe.
So Happy Birthday was originally entitled Froyo.
It was a beat that I made. It was just a little ditty on the computer. It had some little drums and a little chord part, and then I sort of was like, man, I want to play this live. So I wrote it out, but then it was like, okay, this is still kind of just a beat. Like we could make it into a song, but it needs like a melody. So I think I wrote the melody, and then you threw some lyrics on it.
Yeah.
You want to talk about the
I don't
concept
want to
behind
say
the
too
lyrics?
much about the lyrics, but I don't know if you're familiar with this concept, which is a diss track. a diss
It's a little
track.
bit of an
It's like-
FU song.
It's
No,
like
diss track. Oh, yes, I see what
I'm
you're
like,
saying.
you know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yes,
A
a diss track. Yes.
So
Uh-huh. It's a little of that.
it's sort of a diss track. I don't know. I hope that's not too petty.
And that's so early 2000s. Diss.
I know.
Diss tracks.
Yeah,
You know what though? I don't know. It's in the history of the music too. You know.
that's my excuse
Hey,
for
Fables
being
of
a
Fathers,
petty
I think, was the original
bitch.
diss track. You know what I'm saying? Stuff like that. Like, it's been around for a long time.
Yeah, but it always tickles me that because it's like, the song's called Happy Birthday. And
Yeah.
It's a diss track. It's pretty funny.
Well,
It's sarcastic.
Sometimes you really, yeah. Well, that's the thing. Sometimes you really can bring out sort of the bite, with it's a little bit contrast with the titles.
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's a little bit of controversy, I think. I don't want to say controversy, but people have very different approaches to titling instrumental music because I feel like sometimes people come into it and they're like, no, everything has to have a very specific meaning and you want to convey that meaning to the audience.
Like a theory behind
every
every title.
every song has to be like imbued with this sort of like deep concept. And then a lot of other people are like, no, music is music. And if you title it, you're just confusing the purity of the music or whatever. Like, why do you title songs the way that you title them?
I feel required to title songs as in practical necessity.
Yes, that's correct. Yes.
Usually. But I'm definitely not against imbuing the music with some sort of metaphorical meaning, by virtue of a title. That's cool too. But that's definitely not my starting point, usually. Usually, when I'm writing music, I'm just like, this sounds cool, and if I do this will be awesome, and like, you know what I mean? Like, it's more about the sound. Music, I think, is a world unto itself that doesn't need anything else. But it's been shown by many great masters that when combined with other things, music can be even better, like meanings, metaphorical meanings, lyrics, dance, etc. So definitely not against all that stuff.
The title of your album bears some history.
What are you talking about?
I insist.
Yeah, so I actually had to, I ended up calling it I Insist because Sami came up to me one day and it was an untitled song. And she was like, Kaz, I insist that you title this. And so I was like, I insist. And I think you were kind of annoyed. You're like, I think your response
You
was to
probably got a
rolling your
deep
eyes.
eye roll from me, but it's fine.
But it is a good title, and I think as I thought about it more, it kind of goes into sort of the meaning that I've sort of tried to imbue this whole album with as well, which is sort of a little bit of one that's conscious of social change and struggles that people, the black struggle in the Americas. So that's kind of what I think about now when I say I insist. It's being insistent on that struggle and where we are with that struggle. I don't know if we have to get into all that right now, but
Sure.
that's kind of what that means to me now. But yeah, the original one title came from just you insisting that I title it.
Yeah. But sometimes I feel like that's what happens is that I feel like sometimes songs it'll start off, you may not even know what the title is and it will take on its own meaning over time or something like that, and it becomes what it will be later
Yes.
on.
And that's something that I've done with this album a lot. Like, these songs I've been playing for a long time. So what they started off as musically and in my head has definitely changed.
Sure. And you've been playing these songs. Okay, so there's a couple things I want to do. One is you've been playing these songs both at the jam sessions that you run and gigs that you do in town, as well as a regular gig that you do in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
At, what's the name of the club?
Black Cat in San
Black
Francisco.
Cat in San Francisco. And you go out there a couple times a year and
Usually,
play
yeah.
for a week at a time. And then you bring the whole band out from New York and play for a week. And
If I'm lucky, yeah.
yeah, right.
Usually 4 days or so.
I guess it's
Which is
been
nice.
We've been in a global pandemic, so I guess
Yeah.
things
We
have
haven't
been
done it for a
little
while.
bit
We're going back
disrupted.
out there in a couple weeks. But
Cool.
yeah, we had to take a hiatus because of the pandemic.
Yeah, what's the string of dates? Because obviously I have a huge
We're
fan
playing
base in San Francisco.
the day
I wanna make
after
sure.
Thanksgiving,
This is 2021.
which I think is the 26th, November 26th.
26, 27, 28.
Yep. And we have some other dates while we're in town out there.
Cool.
Yeah.
And this music, so that all of these tunes you've been working out with that band for a long time, with a fairly consistent
With that band,
lineup.
it's sort of a rotating cast of characters, but definitely the people who are on the record are people who I've been playing with a lot, yeah.
Sure.
right before we recorded it, we went out to Black Hat, played a whole week, like you're saying, came back and recorded the album.
So you've been. There's something in music that I don't know if non-musicians might not realize this, but musicians, it becomes clear when you do it that you become road ready or like road tested or whatever. Like if you can rehearse a lot, but there's no substitute for just going out and playing the songs, especially multiple nights in a row. Like you could if you do a string of dates, by the last date, by a week in, the music's on fire. And there's no real substitute for that. So doing something like that, playing in a club for a while and getting those tunes together.
You have to play for people.
Yeah, I feel like we're missing that in the jazz scene because gigs are so scarce, man.
Yeah.
I wish I had more opportunities to just be fucking playing every night. You know what I mean? That would be great.
Yeah.
It can be hard to set those things up.
Right. Yeah. But you've set it up for yourself in a sense with the jam sessions.
Yeah. That's every week, so that's good.
Right. So you've been doing that since you moved to New York almost, right? The first one was not the Fifth Estate, it was before that.
Yeah, the Fifth Estate was the first one. That place is not there anymore. And then we moved to Parkside for a couple years. That's the song Parkside. Mm-hmm. And then we moved to Salem Tower, which is where we're at now. And actually, we've been on a really long break from Salem Tower because of the pandemic again. But we're starting back up literally tonight. We're starting that session back up.
2 hours.
In T-minus 2 hours.
Dylan, it's always a good hang.
Yeah.
What made you want to put together a jam session in the first place?
Well, going back to practicality, it's a great way to meet people. I love getting to meet new people and play music with people, but I hate going to jam sessions in the city. Sometimes they can be a little lame. And so it's a way for me to do that, but in a way where I'm in control of everything because it's my session, which I love about it. And also,
you get to test out all your new tunes and everything.
Yeah, that's what I was going to get to. I get to test out my new tunes. It's kind of low stakes. We don't have to play for the full 3 hours. We just play for like an hour. We play a set, and then it's a session. So it's just this nice way where every hour I can play. And like a lot of times at that first set, it's like not everybody's there yet. So we can try out some tunes that are new, that nobody's played yet. Have my dudes sight read some stuff. Mm-hmm. So yeah, for a lot of reasons, it really just works practically. It's a great way to do it.
I mean, you'll bring in a song, think about it some more. Maybe you'll decide like it needs a different section or like something has to change or like I want to do these changes actually for solos or whatever. Like you kind of flesh out the arrangement, based on how it feels to perform it in that context.
Exactly.
There's a big culture in New York of jam sessions, and that's true in many places. But in New York, I think it's more prominent. It's like it's hard. There's a lot of people who just won't show up to jam sessions at all. But I think it's a big part of the community or the culture or whatever. What do you see as being let's say, what people get out of going to these sessions to play with people?
Well, it's like a professional meet and greet, essentially. One big thing about being in New York or just any scene where you're freelancing like this is you just have to show face. Like, people call you for gigs when they saw you last night.
When they say, really I need a sax player.
Who are the sax players?
Who's a sax player?
You think of the people you've seen. Just naturally.
Sure.
So that's important.
Yeah.
It's a way to really get a taste of the competition, I think, too. You go to a session and you're allowed to sort of gauge yourself. Am I as good as these people? Or am I better than these people? Or are they all better than me? And see, you get to hear the other players and see if what they're doing, you know?
Sure.
So that's really valuable too. And it can just be fun to kind of like hang and be out and play music. And like, that's the fact that, what you're mentioning, that there's such a scene of jam sessions, that's a good example of what I'm talking about, of like having a social, like relevancy for the music. Mm-hmm. And to the extent that the larger community of non-musicians can also participate in that, I think it's even better.
Sure.
And I think that exists in the city. And so like that's an example of like what I think we should try to be striving for more in jazz, is these spaces that like actually invite people in a way where they understand that they're a part of the music. I'm talking about non-musicians.
Totally. The audience.
The audience is can be really part of that sometimes. And I think that's something like in Brooklyn, for example, just to narrow in more specifically, like there's a lot of jazz jam sessions in Brooklyn. And I think for young non-musicians in Brooklyn who are out, a lot of them, it's like a thing they're aware of. It's like, oh, a jazz jam session. I can go out and like, it's a fun thing that I can enjoy and like get to hear all these different musicians. Like, I think that's great. Like, that's what I think we're missing more of is like.
For sure.
Yeah. I feel like we need to support that from all angles.
Right.
In every way. Make that more of a normal thing of what's happening, people going out.
Right. And just like to make it more clear, because this is some of the concept that I was talking about before, and I feel like I tend to kind of rambling about it, but like one example that I think of like a music that was born out of like supreme cultural relevancy is like hip hop in the 80s and 90s. I feel like everybody and their brother was rapping and beatboxing and creating art and dancing in those times in New York City. And like that's the hip hop scene that we see, and like that richness and wealth of culture like is so apparent when you look back on that era and that time and that space. And like you had these things like the cipher, like a rap cipher. It's this social construct that was real, that existed, that people would interact with. And like I remember like there's this really classic video of like Mos Def rapping in a cipher. And he just like slays it. He just goes in. And there's all these other random dudes just like in the circle going like this. There's this one dude who's like touching Mos Def a lot. And it's like really uncomfortable. And like that's what I'm talking about. Is just like we need more random motherfuckers just out here being like, hey, for jazz. Yeah. You know what I mean? And like that's what we're missing. I feel like so much of jazz is just trying to be like, the way that it's marketed is just like, this is this super fancy thing that you don't understand. And that's the whole point, is that you don't understand it and it's exclusive. And, you know, jazz, costs $70 to go, to the Blue Note or whatever. And like, that shit is not helping the music, in my opinion.
Yeah. I agree with you 100%.
I hope that example helps.
No, I think it does.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah, but when you talk to old guys, they talk about jazz the way that people would talk about hip hop or whatever. Like
exactly.
A lot of old dudes are like, "Oh, I wanted to play the trumpet because it was like that was the hip."
That's how you get girls.
Thing. Yeah,
right.
Exactly. But there's a lot of I wonder where we went astray. I'm trying to figure that out a little bit because, and I talk about this a lot, but like when I started listening to music, I was into jazz music because it was just like because I loved it, because it was like. It was the same as if I was into like punk rock or if I was into, anything else. Like, it just, to me, it spoke to me in a certain way. But it wasn't like I was like, I didn't come at it from the perspective of being in like, oh, this is an academic program and I'm supposed to learn how to play this music because it's like part of school or something like that. I didn't really have it as part of school in the way that other people might. But then when I don't know, at a certain point I realized like, I don't know if it's the musicians did this. I feel like I want to blame the musicians a little bit, but I'm not exactly sure.
Yeah.
Like,
there's some blame there.
Where it's like, but I don't know. This is what I'm trying to figure out. It's like, where did it go from being like, oh, this is like, no, you're not going to understand this. This is above your head. You know what I'm saying? Because that's the part that I think people feel that. I think they will go to shows and they'll be like, because non-musicians don't understand reggae music any better than they understand jazz music. They're not sitting there like, oh, it's interesting, the one drop and there's, they're playing it's the 1 to the 4 or something. Like, people don't understand the music theory either way. So what is it, like, where did it go sideways where it's no longer like, accessible to the public at large? You know what I mean? How do we bring it back to that mindset?
A good question.
I think it's a question of your priorities as a player. Like, why are you, when you're playing a solo, let alone like the writing or anything, let's just break it down to like you're playing a solo. Who are you playing for? What is the point of your solo? Like, what are you serving with your playing? And I think a lot of us are playing for the other musicians. We're playing for ourselves. We're playing for our ego. And I think it's kind of a different thing when you see somebody playing for the audience, playing for the listener. And not every jazz musician is down to do that. And I'm not even saying that that's what we all should be doing 100% of the time, because I think, it all has value. But I just think at the end of the day, for a million reasons, we need the audience and we need listeners, and to just totally shut them out, it's to our own detriment. We lose out on a lot just shutting the audience out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think academia can be blamed to some degree too. I mean, we're talking about like the musicians themselves, they bear some responsibility for this, but also like, I don't know, it's like coming out of the 40s and 50s and maybe 60s when this music did have a lot of relevancy in our society, I think, and like those spaces that I'm talking about for the music, for the audience to actually interact with the music in a meaningful way, they existed. But I think coming out of that era, going into the 70s, 80s, 90s, current day, like the music has become so academia.
Academic?
Yeah, I want
Academified?
Academified, thank you. And in a lot of ways, I mean, that's great. I don't want to say that's the worst thing. Like, just think about, like, school band. I think now kids don't have this anymore because arts have been slashed across the country.
Some parts of the country you might have.
Some parts of the country. I know in my inner city schools here in New York, they don't have this.
Right.
Other parts they do. But, like, school band. Kids show up to band and they get all of the instruments. And, like, I think for decades, they learned how to play jazz. And it was this thing that you did in school, in middle school, in high school. And I think generations of kids have that association with jazz of it's like, it's this really hard music. It's kind of like, became like, you know, in that way, literally got treated like America's classical music. And I think there's something great about that. That's actually really cool in a lot of ways. But also I think that we're looking at like some of the downsides of that. And then obviously when you talk about the college level, I think the academia thing comes in too, where it's like, yeah, it's just like, a lot of these kids, we're just training them to like do the most amazing thing, and it's taken out of that context in the street where people are actually playing for each other. So I think that's part of it too. And I also think the third thing that you could blame, there's the musicians themselves. I think it's academia, and then also like this music has been marketed really in specific ways for a long time that I think people like Miles Davis and a lot of others have really protested about. You know, and to this day, man, like I see like one thing I've been thinking about is like I see all these, I get Facebook ads for like these jazz events in the city, and it'll be like an intimate night of jazz, or it'll be like the music of Miles Davis, and it's very interesting to me the way that those are marketed, the photos that they use, and like the type of people who are shown in those photos, and the type of environments that are shown in those photos. It's a very specific thing that's being pushed on me in that ad, and yeah, I don't feel represented by that kind of stuff. But I think that those ads that I'm talking about are very representative of like how people think of jazz now. This intimate night of jazz, like
sexy.
I don't think I fit into that. Mm-hmm. You know, and yeah,
right.
It's sexy.
Or people will tell me, be like, "Oh, you sing jazz? Oh, jazz is so relaxing."
Right.
You know?
So these, exactly. And those kinds of associations and the type of associations that I'm getting from my Facebook ad, like, I blame marketing and the music industry and the record. Like, they've created this bullshit image of jazz that isn't real, so.
Sure. Right.
I also think we're all just like
answers to this
scared
question.
of black people. You know what I mean? So to have a black person.
That's part of what I was trying to get at. These Facebook ads
like,
featured only white people. I didn't want to say it, but yes, that was. And I just thought that was interesting. It's like you're marketing a music of Miles Davis thing, and it's like there was like these pictures of like these white guys in suits with the instruments. I don't know.
But even like so if you take the opposite, right? Because we have this like sexy, relaxing white people hanging out in a basement, right? And then the opposite would be like angry or excited or like joyously, you know, like celebrating, just like anything, any extreme emotion in like black people, right? Like just like living this sort of like celebration or anguish or angst or whatever, like the drama of their lives. Like I just feel like that we're still scared of that. That's still like freaky
as a society,
to us.
Yeah, maybe that's true.
I will say that I was having a conversation driving back from this gig last night about how a lot of the music that I hear now that resonates with me, and I think that resonates with a lot of people in the more rock world, or like, I don't know that much about pop music, so I can't speak to that exactly, but like a lot of different music is a little bit scary. I feel like the music that resonates with people has to have a little, I could be proven wrong on this, but an edge to it, a little bit of danger. You know what I'm saying? Like, I think one of the records we were talking about is like Kendrick Lamar's "To Pimp a Butterfly," or what was the record? Flying Lotus's "You're Dead," or like I'm trying to think of records in jazz world that would be more like in that realm or something like that. But like that music really resonates with me. Sometimes I feel like jazz has become too safe. Like somebody talking about jazz as being a relaxing style of music, you're not sitting around listening to like Mingus's "Let My Children Hear Music" and you're like, oh, this is really nice. Let's turn on some candles or whatever and like check this out. It's like he's trying to get at something that is a deep, visceral part of the human condition.
Right.
And if we lose track of that, but if you go to a rock show, it's not going to be like, oh, everything is technically perfect and we're trying to just convey this like we nailed all the changes or whatever. But something is going to resonate with people because it conveys something that's deeply human, not because it's correct or because it's technically advanced or because it's like, it's like avant-garde in like a certain sense.
To me, that spirit that you're talking about is always going to be what kids are excited about their music, right? Mm-hmm. Like the kids are into. And jazz was that at a certain point, and those kids grew up. Rock and roll was that. Like rap was that. And what is that now? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Trap music. I don't know.
But I think there's something there. I mean, there is. Maybe that's what, I don't know. Maybe the music that I tend to gravitate towards is more, maybe that's just me. Maybe it's just a personal thing. I mean, everybody's, who knows? Maybe there's some people out there who are just like.
People definitely seek different things in music, man.
And that's the value of it.
It's true. They really do.
I really would never really want to listen to like Kenny G or something like that, but a lot of people love Kenny G, and it's because the music is soothing for them.
Sure.
And if you can't see that, I think you're kidding yourself a little bit. Like, it's soothing music in a certain sense. I think as musicians, we cringe a little bit, but for the average person, those kinds of melodies, just like very like nice, very consonant. The dissonance is all very well managed.
The tone is pure.
The tone is very pure and clean. Like, people like that, and they like that because they're looking for something very different than we are. Mm-hmm. That's okay.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
I'm okay with that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not everybody wants to be challenged by music. That's very true.
Yeah, and that's fine. The beauty is if everybody can get what they're looking for. So maybe I shouldn't be too judgmental on any of this stuff.
We try not to judge people for the music that they're into.
Yeah, but I mean, we do, of course.
But we obviously do.
We obviously do. I mean,
ruthlessly, as soon as they leave the room.
What else are we here? Why do we have these degrees for?
God, why did I pay so much money?
Okay, there's a couple other things we could cover here. Kaz, who were some of your early saxophone influences, and do you continue to think about pushing yourself forward as an artist, and what do you do to try to pursue advancing yourself as an artistic person?
Well, my big saxophone influences were probably John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Dexter Gordon, and Sonny Rollins, Joshua Redman, and Miguel Zenon. I listened to a lot, like talking about more modern people. And Stan Getz. Stan Getz for a long time was like my favorite saxophone player. And I think I've grabbed some stuff from all of those guys. Miguel Zenon was actually my teacher in school, and I still study with him sometimes. He helped me out with this album too, a lot. So
thank you, Miguel.
Thanks to Miguel. You got to thank you on the record.
Mm-hmm.
So those were my main guys growing up. In terms of like pushing myself to develop, trying to keep practicing all the time and get better on my instrument and just improve, all the different various elements of playing the saxophone. That can be a struggle. It's a hard instrument sometimes. We were talking earlier about like how learning Cuban music and sort of trying to internalize that and then hoping that it comes out in my music in other ways. So I'm always continuing to work on that. I have a music teacher right now who's a conga player. So I've been learning. He lives in Mexico, but he's a Cuban percussionist, and his name's Manly Lopez, and he's been helping me learn how to play different like folkloric styles of music from Cuba. So I've been learning güiro, bembe, and palo. We're probably gonna work on playing guarapachangueo, which is kind of like a style of rumba music, basically. So that's one of the really specific things that I've been taking on recently. Is like I've been learning new shit on the congas, and all of those rhythms that I'm learning and concepts. I think a lot about how I can take those and apply those to saxophone and to my composition, and that's definitely, I'm hoping that's in my, my next album. It's going to contain a lot of that information. Yeah, I feel like those lessons are helping me continue to shape my concept of like what kind of musician I want to be. So that's cool.
Do you have a vision for the next album?
Not a clear one. I have some songs that will most likely be on it. It will probably be centered around playing with Kayvon Gordon, who's a drummer from Detroit, and Tyrone Allen, who's the second, who's the bass player from I Insist. I've been playing with those guys a lot as a trio. And we've got some new music that we've been working on that's really cool. So that will probably be part of it. I don't know what else or what specific directions I'm gonna go in with that. Yeah, not
Do you
sure.
think you'll take the same approach of just shedding the tunes?
I want
live?
to play the music a lot more with those guys before we record it.
Sure.
I feel like if that's your next album, then to me, your album after that, it would be like all like Brazilian influenced.
Yeah, maybe. Who knows? I feel like I could go a lot of ways.
Yeah.
I wonder, I feel like maybe I'm getting to the point where I need to challenge myself to write something with more complex arrangements and orchestration. Because my music is very not orchestrated the way I write it.
With you're talking about with additional instruments or just
Yeah.
yeah.
Sort of in the vein, just the Brazilian thing that you're talking about. Like that's one element of Brazilian music that I really love is some of the, not all the time, but certain artists and certain styles really usually involve a lot of really intricate orchestration and arrangements that involve like, the full orchestra with strings and horns and trombone, etc. Different parts that are written out very specifically and work really well together. Kind of like soul music. I feel like soul music is very similar in that way, that a lot of times it can involve really complex arrangements.
For sure. Yeah.
That really serve the music.
No doubt, yeah. I was talking recently about all the Motown records.
Right.
I mean, the arrangements of those records are
Right.
unbelievable.
So that's something that I always really appreciate in music, but I haven't done much.
That
maybe
could
one
come in the
day-
form of like a collaboration too. I mean, you might just find like the right person to help you with that.
Kali says that he wants to write orchestration for a bunch of my music, actually. So maybe that'll
That
happen.
could be interesting. Yeah, do like a song.
For my Brazilian
see
stuff.
how it goes. Yeah.
Sammy, what about you? What do you do on a daily basis or regularly to try to push yourself forward?
To try to push myself
If anything,
forward.
I mean,
What do you
do?
No, I
Practice
mean,
a lot.
I practice a lot, yeah. I'm writing. I mean, I'm kind of sitting on an album right now. I'm kind of finishing up mixing it, I guess. And we'll see what will happen with that. I think it's going to be called Morning, so we can look out for that.
Cool.
But, I mean, I have, like another couple albums worth of music written. But lately I've been kind of interested in, because on my music I'm playing keys, ideally like Wurlitzer, and I just started playing with upright bass and drums. And so I've been into doing that more, and I don't know, it's hard for me to put into like words what I want to do for my next recording, but I feel like it's becoming clearer to me slowly. I think it's going to be kind of like this sort of like singer-songwritery, jazzy kind of thing, like my last album, but maybe that kind of like triangulated with almost like Radiohead kind of like weirdo sort of like kind of almost like rock kind of like thing, like kind of like, how like Fiona Apple sometimes will have like a freak out moment, sort of like that. I feel like it's
totally.
like somewhere in there. I don't know. I'm not trying to like put too many, put it in too
I
many
feel like
boxes.
recently, in the last couple of years, you've been really re-envisioning yourself as a musician.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
Like, I feel like these days you're more of a singer-songwriter
Yeah.
in how you think about it, as opposed to like a jazz singer.
That's right. I've been playing a lot more keyboard. That's the main thing I'm focusing on these days is playing keys and playing and singing and writing for that.
And also, as opposed to like R&B, I think you were conceptualizing your music more in like this neo
Like
soul
jazz R&B kind of thing.
But now I feel like you've kind of gotten away from that a little bit into a different space of like what people generally call singer-songwriter.
Yeah, I mean the term singer-songwriter for me is
term.
I think it's confusing because
yeah.
it's confusing because it is a genre like singer-songwriter music. It's like go with the guitar.
Even when you say it, people have associations with it.
And like that's definitely not what I'm doing. I don't play guitar actually, but it's just that I'm singing and I'm writing and I'm playing the songs. But yeah, I have like a group of new songs I'm really excited about that I've been playing with this drummer, Diego Ramirez, who's been imbuing a lot into the songs. I've been really happy with what he's been bringing to it. I feel like I'm always hearing my music like with kind of like a lot more like rhythmic content underneath it. Like I might play like a slow song, but to me there's always like 2/3 and there's always like somehow like a clave, you know what I mean? And I feel like I have a really hard time communicating that just because I'm like not the best at playing keys. Like I feel like I'm like an intermediate keyboard player. So I'm doing that and then I'm singing, but I don't want to be like singing the clave, you know what I mean? So I have a hard time communicating that on my own.
That's
and I
what
feel
Diego's
like
for.
Diego really gets it and he's just like right there and he's really on it. But he's also not just playing everything. He's not just playing too much. I don't know. I just feel really on the same page with him and I hope that he will continue to play with me.
It's always such a big deal, the different ways that, and I think that speaks to the jam session, the community vibe, is the idea that, each individual person that comes into the music is going to bring their own experience and their own artistry to the thing. It's interesting, like, all right, this music may be shaped by whoever is involved in this, and it gives you a support for what it is that you're doing. Yeah,
I mean, ideally, I think you want to create like a grouping of people that's greater than the sum of its parts, right? Mm-hmm. Everybody has, it's like a perfect balance of things, and you're able to communicate and understand, what everybody's doing and sort of magnify it in this kind of like exponential way.
For sure. Now you guys spend a lot of time together.
Too much time.
What do you notice?
Did I hurt your feelings? I'm sorry.
I wasn't going to say that. We do spend a lot of time together. Arguably too much.
What do you notice about the difference between the way that the two of you, let's say, think about music or think about performing or whatever? Are there stark differences? Do you say to yourself, like, Sami, do you say, like, oh, it's really interesting that Kaz approaches music in this particular way or thinks about things in this way when writing or playing? Or is there a thing, Kaz, where you're like, does it bring out the contrast in one another to be able to, like, spend a lot of time playing
we have
music
really
together?
different writing styles.
Yeah.
Our music is not really similar, hardly at all.
Yeah. Well, let me just say first, I have so hugely benefited from my musical relationship with Kaz and have learned so much from him throughout the years, and just like I can't even begin to measure. I don't know, like I have no idea what I would even sound like what my writing would be like if it wasn't for how much I've gotten from you in like just hearing you and observing your practice, but also getting direct feedback from you on my music. I feel like I've really benefited from that.
That's nice.
It's true. But yeah, we have pretty different modes of writing. I mean, I feel like since we've gotten in this apartment where we have enough space, it's been...
Barely enough space.
Yeah, there's one door that separates where I practice and where he practices. But now we can practice at the same time, which is just like a total necessity. Like I could never go back to when we were, super broke and did not have the space and could only practice one at a time.
In a certain sense, we do have a really similar process, though, because like I was saying, when I'm writing my music, a lot of times I'm playing chords and I'm singing the melody.
That's true. That's how we both
do
write
too.
music that way.
So we both write music that way, actually.
Yes, that's true.
So that is similar, but just the kind of sounds that we end up going for are very different.
I bet they're more similar than we tend to even imagine.
I'm sure there's something in common. For sure. I don't know. That's a tough question. I'm trying to think.
Yeah, we're like too inside it to even know.
Yeah, that's
It's hard to
the
say.
case.
I need somebody else to tell me.
Right. Yeah. Pretty good. All right. So where can people find? So I Insist is out on Greenleaf Music. You can find that on all the spots.
All the spots.
Buy the CD. Where can they buy the CD?
You can buy the CD many places. You want to pass me that test copy?
Let's do it.
You can buy it.
That's not a test copy.
It's not. No. I was just kidding. It's a real copy.
It's a real fresh copy. Look at this. Wait, hold on a second.
Do you have an open one?
Look at this.
Because you should show the inside.
Album cover. What's the deal with the album cover? Let's do that real quick. It's an awesome
Thanks,
cover.
man. Good friend of mine, Hamo, made the album cover. I commissioned him to make this. Also the back cover, which I also really love.
The linoleum
He
print?
did a linoleum print. That's the black part is a linoleum print, and then he watercolored in all the colors. He's a really interesting artist. He's based in, I think he's from Sweden. But his family is Guyanese, like me. So my dad's from Guyana. I think one of his parents is also from Guyana. So we have that in common, like heritage-wise. And yeah, he just makes really interesting art that is very colorful and evocative to me and feels like it has a lot of African influence that is very familiar to me. My grandfather on my mom's side was like an art collector in Jamaica. And it reminds me a lot of Jamaican art. So I think, yeah, maybe it's just like Caribbean style. It's like Caribbean art. But then me and him have a lot in common. We're both young black guys. When I met him, he was living in New York, and he's not a musician, but he was trying to make it as an artist out here. And so I just always felt like it was a good connection just in terms of who the artist was, and I really love his art. So
Say his name again?
Hamo, Hamo. You can find, that's his Instagram handle.
Cool. Okay.
At Hamo. Or no, his Instagram is Hamo House.
Hamo House.
HamoHouse.
Sweet. And but you can get the CD on.
Yeah, it's on
Greenleaf.
Spotify. You can get it on the Greenleaf, their Bandcamp page is where they sell it. You can get it on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, Tidal, etc. I sell them in person. If you come see me at a gig, I'll sell you one for $15.
Sweet. Yep. And they can find you at Salem's Hour on Sunday nights now.
That's right.
On the regular.
That's
Yep.
right.
And then great. And then Sammy, you got a record under your own name called.
I have one as Sami Stevens and the Man I Love, and that's called And I'm Right. And I have it on vinyl. It's on vinyl. If you
There
want.
you go.
There's some vinyl left.
I always encourage people to buy the CDs or to buy the vinyl.
Yeah,
that's the best way you can
please.
support the music.
Yeah.
And it's beautiful vinyl too. It's like clear. Some of it's Coke bottle green. It's really cute.
It's cool.
And honestly, when I hear that album like as MP3s, I'm like, okay, yeah, it's an okay album. And when I hear it on vinyl, I'm like, I'm a genius. I'm like, this is the best thing ever.
You gotta
Like
get
it
that
just sounds better.
Yeah.
It really just sounds
It does
better.
sound different, yeah.
It counts for a lot.
It was
Yeah.
mixed for vinyl too. Like that's how it was made.
It's a good move. Well, congratulations on the new record. And we'll be looking forward to hearing the next thing.
Thanks, buddy.
Whatever-
Thanks so much for
whatever
having us,
happens
man.
next.
This was fun.
Of course,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks for doing it. Appreciate it.
Check it out, guys.
Boom! I insist. I insist you check it out.
I insist you do.
We out. All right, gang. Thanks for sticking around for another super fun episode of Jazztopia. Big thanks to Kazemde George and Sami Stevens for joining me this week. It was great to hear their album. Be sure to check out Kaz's new record, I Insist, on Greenleaf Music. It's a really beautiful record. I meant all those things that I said. It's really a great album. Check it out for sure. All right, if you'd like to stay up to date with what we're doing here, you can follow us on SoundCloud at soundcloud.com/Jazztopia Podcast. You can also find us on all the regular podcasting, Apple Podcasts, iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, the whole thing. And we have a YouTube channel up and running with all of the video from the various discussions we've had, and we're going to keep putting them out. All right, we're going to be just trying to build this thing little by little and put out some new episodes and talk to some musicians and try to get some new knowledge. So if you like what's happening here, you can be sure to find us on all these platforms. Be sure to tell your friends. All right, tell your friends, spread the word. We really appreciate that. Also, if you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Instagram at Bob Spellman or on Facebook at Bobby Spellman Music. Or you can find the Jazztopia Facebook at Jazztopia Podcast. All right, gang, have a wonderful time. We'll be back with some more discussions on jazz and improvised music coming up real soon. See ya!